Oh well, joining me live is the Climate Change Authority Chair and the former New South Wales Treasurer, Matt Kean. Thank you for coming in. I'm going to start by playing you what you had to say to me about nuclear power in an interview in 2021. What a surprise. Here you go. Do you think we'll ever have nuclear power stations in Australia?
Yeah, I think so. There's some exciting things happening on the nuclear front. So we're excited about the opportunities that technological innovation will bring. Into the future, will nuclear have a role to play? I think so, and I hope so. But right now, I can't bet on technology that isn't readily available.
Well, you did put that caveat in there, but you seem to have changed your mind a bit about this, haven't you?
Well, in that interview in 2021, there were some exciting technologies available. NuScale were developing the small modular nuclear reactor technology. Since then, NuScale have walked back from that technology, so they're even further off into the distance. So what we've got to do, Andrew, is bet on technologies that do exist, that will lower emissions, but will also lower household bills. And that's wind, solar, backed up by firming. That's the pathway for Australia, to not only do our bit for the environment, but also to help families with cost of bill pressures.
Would you agree not that popular though, wind? Solar's popular, but wind and some of these other renewables, there's doubt about them, farmers don't like them, etc. It's not an easy sell for the government.
Well, I tell you what is an easy sell, lower power bills. And what we know is the cheapest form of electricity today for Australians is wind, solar, backed up by firming. So we should be rolling that out at scale because it's doing our bit for the environment, but most importantly, it's helping families with household bill pressure. Energy bills are going through the roof, and it's not because there's too many renewables in the system, it's because there's not enough. If you put more supply into the system, you put downward pressure on bills and help families with cost of living relief.
All right, so the Climate Change Authority released this sector pathways report last week. It said waiting for new, better, cheaper technologies is tantamount to choosing to continue to emit. So you could apply that to nuclear, as you're saying, but you could apply it to battery technology as well, couldn't you? And other technologies.
Obviously, what the report says is that there is a number of technologies that are available today that are at an economic price point that will help with cost of living pressures and can be rolled out at scale. So we're saying get on with the job of rolling them out. That's wind and solar, batteries, etc. But there are other technologies that are still way off in the horizon. We should be investing in research and development to bring them to a point where we can use them to help us do our bit for the environment, but also help continue to grow our economy.
Because net zero by 2050, is that achievable? The government's running behind, isn't it? The target of the federal government is 82% renewables by 2030. At the moment, it's heading for about 65%. We're getting 3.5 gigawatts a year of renewables at the moment, including solar power, and the government needs 6 new gigawatts. Do you accept the government won't meet that target in 2030?
Well, what the report we released last week set out is a clear pathway to get to net zero by 2050. And it clearly says the lowest hanging fruit in helping us get to net zero by 2050 is the decarbonisation of our electricity grid. That means the rapid deployment of wind, solar and firming technologies to ensure not only we have system security, reliability and cheaper household bills, but we also do our bit for the environment.
But they're behind, aren't they?
Well, what we've done is clearly say we need to do more.
So this is a kind of a message to the federal government, to your boss in effect here, to say, you guys got to do more.
My job is to give frank and fearless advice to the government of the day, whatever political colour that is. And this report clearly sets out that there is a plan to get to net zero. There is a pathway to get to net zero. And we've made recommendations about what can be done to achieve that.
Because there's talk they'll delay their 2035 target. What would you make past the election? What would you make of that if they decide to do that?
So we're not at the stage of providing a date for a 2035 target. Right now, I've just come into the role. There's a lot of work that's being undertaken. We need to do comprehensive scientific modelling to see what the science requires us to do, but we also need to do economic modelling.
Would you like to see it before the election? Would you like to see that target named by the government before the election?
What I'd like to see, so I can't talk for what the government or the opposition will do when it comes to their policies. My job is as the independent chair of the Climate Authority is to provide frank and fearless advice about what that target should be. So we'll make a recommendation once the work is done.
How ambitious would you like to see it? Because it's 43% by 2030.
I've outlined the principles on which that target should be based. It should be science aligned, it should be achievable, and that's exactly why we're doing the work to ensure that it's as robust as possible.
All right, this report also calls for an overhaul of planning processes and creation of renewable energy zones. where would you like to see those zones?
We've already outlined where the zone, well, as the former Energy Minister in New South Wales, the renewable energy zones are already identified in New South Wales. But AEMO, the system operator, they've outlined a pathway to transition our electricity grid across the nation.
How many zones are we talking?
Well, the integrated system plan sets out the cheapest way to decarbonise our electricity grid. That's the independent system operator. They can speak to that. But what I can say as the independent Climate Authority Chair is that report sets out the fastest way to help us not only do our bit for the energy system and help household bills, but also sets us on a path to net zero for 2050.
Are some of the zones where the coalition wants to put nuclear power plants?
Again, the integrated system plan doesn't look at nuclear per se. They set out what is the clearly cheapest and most viable pathway to decarbonise the electricity grid, and it doesn't include nuclear.
What do you think of the recent earthquakes in the Hunter Valley and the proposal for a nuclear power station by Peter Dutton there?
Look, again, as the Independent Climate Authority Chair, we've set out the best path for Australia to meet its obligations. That's in the fantastic report that we released last week. Andrew, I'd encourage your viewers that are interested in these topics to go and check that out.
Right, this is a bit different to when you were a politician. Now, how did this job come about? Did Chris Bowen ring you personally? Do you feel like a rat to the Liberal Party for taking it on?
There's a long-standing tradition in Australian politics for governments to appoint political actors of a different political persuasion to provide public servants. The governments that I was in New South Wales appointed, for example, John Robertson, the former leader of the Labor Party, to chair the state insurer, iCare. We appointed John Hatzistergos, the former Labor Attorney General, to head up the Independent Commission Against Corruption. The current Labor government, I'm not the first political appointment from the different team that they've made. The Albanese government appointed Kelly O'Dwyer, a former minister in the Abbott government and the Turnbull government,
but, I mean,
to the National Reconstruction
have you copped some blowback
Funds.
from Liberal people? I mean,
Well, can I also just round out by saying my friend and colleague Victor Dominello was appointed by the Albanese government to chair the review into cybersecurity and digital ID. So this is not an unusual practice.
Sure.
I'm continuing to provide public service consistently with the policies that I put in place and advocated for as a Liberal minister. Those policies were taken through a Liberal party room, a coalition cabinet. I'm not doing anything differently to what I've always advocated for, and that's to leave our planet to our kids better than we found it.
all right, you've had this former New South Wales Treasury official, Stephen Bartos, recently quoted as saying that after it was announced you've taken this job with this firm, Wallamai Capital, you should resign one of the two roles, that you have a clear conflict in that Wallamai Capital stands to make millions of dollars from investing in carbon credits. What would you say to that? Are you doing any lobbying for them as well?
What I'd say is that there is a strong governance and probity framework that was put in place by the previous coalition government to manage conflicts for members of the authority, including the chair and also board members. I'm operating within that strong legislated probity framework that was set up by the previous government.
Sure.
And they were happy for their previous appointed chair, Grant Kean, to operate within. That framework has been strengthened since I've taken on the role, and I'll operate with the highest level of integrity within that framework, as should be expected.
Will you lobby for Wallamai?
No, my role for Wallamai is as the Director of Stakeholder Relations and Regulatory Affairs. My job is to ensure that in that role, I operate within the strong legislated probity frameworks that have been put in place.
That sounds like lobbying, stakeholder relations, or not?
Well, stakeholders involve a range of people.
Including government?
My job is to operate within the strong legislated governance frameworks that were set up by the previous government. They saw that fit to ensure that Grant King, previous chair, and previous members of the authority were able to manage their role as industry participants. And what I will say, Andrew, is that the Climate Change Authority Act actively contemplates that the chair and members of the authority will be industry participants. That's why you've got a strong framework to manage real and perceived conflicts. I'll operate within those strong frameworks.
Just finally and briefly, tough time for the New South Wales Liberal Party. They've stuffed these local government election nominations. Peter Dutton's launched a federal takeover of the party. Do you agree with his actions?
That's a matter for the Liberal Party. My job as the independent chair of the Climate Authority is to give frank and fearless advice to all political leaders about how we can ensure we get to net zero by 2050.
Officially out of politics, Matt Kean. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.